Hello. Well, this is class 4 of the history and use of the Book of Common Prayer. Sorry didn't get this to you last week, but as I said in my email, I was out of town and had a nice, relaxing vacation with my cousin. So, uh, anyway, let's get started. I think where we left off is we're ready to start the calendar. And if you will pull out your handout from, well, shoot, what is the name of that? I can find out real quickly. Uh, well, it's handout 6B, the Book of Common Prayer Class Revised, is the file you're looking for. It's pages 3 and 4, and at the top of page 3 it has section 7, the calendar. And we're going to start with the calendar. Now, the calendar of the church can be found in the prayer book on, let's see, it starts on page Roman numeral 46. It continues on from there. If you look on that page, it says at the top the calendar, that it has January, February, March, and then the days of the month listed below that. All right. The Christian year is undoubtedly the greatest safeguard ever devised preserving the integrity of the Christian gospel. And if you read through the rest of this that's down here, what you're going to find is that certain denominations and certain groups of people have certain emphases, and they emphasize it all the time. And I know from growing up in the First Christian Church in Monmouth, Illinois, every sermon ended with an altar call. The purpose of every sermon was to get people to be baptized. And most of the people that were baptized were kids at about the age of 12 or 13 when it was expected of you to be baptized at that point. The First Christian Church is like the Baptists. They don't baptize infants. Anyway, so every sermon was an altar call, and that's good to some extent, but every sermon, it gets to be a little much. But anyway, so if you read through there, it talks about how different groups tend to emphasize one thing over the rest. But the value of the Christian year and the calendar is that once every 12 months, the church circumnavigates the life and teachings of our Lord. The important points of the gospel are commemorated annually in a season, a Sunday, or a holy day. To follow the Christian year is to share in a balanced gospel. So, just as a briefly, from Advent, we're preparing for our Lord's coming and His second coming. Then we have the Incarnation, and continuing from Christmas to the Epiphany, and then after. Then you have the Sundays of Advent, and then begins the preparation for Easter. Then there's the resurrection. Then there's the Sundays after Easter, and then the Sundays after Trinity. And there's different emphases on different seasons. And so you get the whole thing throughout the Christian year. I want to emphasize here, you may be asked this on a question. The 10 seasons, there's 10 seasons, and the prayer book terms are Advent season, Christmastide, Epiphany season, pre-Lent, Lent, Passiontide, Eastertide, Ascensiontide, Whitsuntide, and Trinity Sunday. Keep in mind, the last 2 weeks of Lent are referred to as Passiontide in the Book of Common Prayer. All right. Now, going down further on the underlined part here, Toby's here and he's looking at me. I can't figure out what he wants. All right. A great deal of space is taken with the tables of lessons from Holy Scripture for all those Sundays, feast days, and fast days. It's not just an interesting system which someone has compiled for theoretical purposes. is a product of long Christian experience. Week by week, year in and year out, we follow our Lord in a steady round of commemoration so that no part of the gospel is lost in the Christian practice in the 21st century. More than that, the church calendar binds modern Christians in close affinity with their forefathers in the faith. If you go through the propers for the Holy Communion, you'll find that lots of the lessons and the collects date back 1,200 years at least, if not more. The calendar preserves the solidarity and the continuity of the Christian revelation. It submerges fragmentary eccentricities in the wholeness. It submerges fragmentary eccentricities in the wholeness of the gospel. So that's our introduction to the calendar. The calendar itself and what we're going to be talking about are found on Roman numerals 46 to 49. All right. Now, the calendar of the prayer book, the American prayer book, conforms mostly to the calendar of the 1662 English prayer book. There are what are referred to as red letter days and black letter days. I think it comes from the red letter days being printed in red and the black letter days being printed in black. There are no black letter days in the 1928 Book of Common Prayer. The red letter days are days provided with the special liturgical propers of collect, epistle, and gospel, and the black letter days which have no liturgical observance. In the 28 prayer book, and if you look at the calendar on page 46, Roman numeral 46, you see January 1st, the circumcision, the 6th, the Epiphany, the 25th, the conversion of St. Paul, February 2nd, purification of Virgin Mary, 24th, St. Matthias, and then March 25th, the Annunciation of the Virgin Mary. If you go over to the next page where it has the calendar in April, you'll see that the only red letter day there listed there is the 25th, the Feast of St. Mark. Now, April 23rd is the Feast of St. George, and in England, the Feast of St. George is a red letter day, or at least it's a black letter day, so it's in the calendar. But you see here in the 28 prayer book, those black days aren't listed. Now, after the 28 prayer book was put together and liturgists began discussing liturgy and how things should be done and things like that, which reminds me of the question, what's the difference between a liturgist and a terrorist? You can negotiate with a terrorist. All right, you may stop laughing now. If you didn't laugh, you don't know much about liturgy or liturgists. Anyway, in 1963, the Episcopal Church did come out with a book called Lesser Feasts and Fasts, and I have a copy of it. It's at home, but it lists these black letter saints' days, and some of them have specific epistles and gospels and collects. Some of them are what are called common, which there's a collect where you put the person's name in, but it's a general collect, and those are also divided up into things like bishops and doctors and confessors and martyrs and groups like that. The missals, of course, do have black letter saints' days, and let's just take a quick look here. If you pull out your October 2016 Ordo calendar, you'll see, for example, on October 4th, the Feast of St. Francis of Assisi, the 6th, St. Bruno, the 13th, the translation of St. Edward the King and Confessor, that's Edward the Confessor, St. Ethelreda, On the 17th, St. Raphael the Archangel on the 24th. Saints Crispin and Crispian, while they are red, are still black letter saints' days. They're red because they're martyrs. All right. Let's see. But the American 1928 prayer book did provide a common for a saint's day, which is found on page 258. I'm just going to just turn over there quickly. And there's actually two different collects, but only one set of lessons. The epistles from Hebrews, the Gospels from Matthew, the parable of the sheep and the goats. So if you look at the second collect, you can see then, O Almighty God, who has called to us in faith, called us to faith in Thee, and has compassed us about with so great a cloud of witnesses, grant that we, encouraged by the good examples of Thy saints, and especially of Thy Saint Francis, Saint Ethelreda, Saint Raphael, Saint Edward, whatever saint you would want to commemorate, or celebrate, or commemorate. And if you want to follow the 20 prayer book, that's what you would use. If you want a little more variety, the 1963 Lesser Feasts and Fasts also has that information. There's 73, I think it is, Lesser Feasts and Fasts, which is an expansion of the 63. The trouble with the 73 is you're now getting into that iffy area of the 1976 prayer book. So I would very carefully go over the lessons and the collects just to make sure they're saying what you want them to say. All right. Oh yeah, if you want to know more about the specific collects and epistles and gospels, most of the book of Shepherd's book is made up of commentary on those different items. And so it starts on page 90 with Advent 1 and continues on. So if you're interested in any of the history of any of the specific Sundays or holy days, there's a lot of information in there. They're also a good source of ideas for sermons if you're having a hard time coming up with a sermon for a specific day. I don't know if I can't remember if I mentioned this or not, but I do or have given sermons based on the collect, and you can get information about those from Shepherd's commentary. All right. Now, the Christian calendar stems from the calendar of the Jews, and the earliest Jewish festivals were related to the movement of heavenly planets in the seasons of the year, but they were reinterpreted after the exile as a series of historical commemorations of significant events in the life of the church's people. Past experiences of God's mighty acts of His extraordinary redemptive activity among His people were annually relived and renewed, so that their benefits might be continually made effective in the present. There were 3 Jewish observances which were taken right at the very beginning. First, there was Passover and Pentecost, which were 2 poles of one continuous 50-day period celebrating God's ultimate redemptive activity through the death and resurrection of Christ and the outpouring of the Holy Spirit. The third observance was the weekly observance of the Sabbath. But even in apostolic times, that was being supplanted in the Gentile mission churches by the liturgical assemblies on the first day of the week. Now, Sunday in the pagan world, unlike the Sabbath for the Jews, Sunday was not a day of rest from work. And so what you have beginning is vigil services on Saturday evenings, and based on one part of Acts, it would seem like St. Paul preached, or at least talked, all evening, and that's where the boy fell out of the window, but wasn't hurt. Some people say he's the patron saint of people who have to listen to sermons, boring sermons. Let's see. And so then the Eucharist would be celebrated early in the morning on Sunday morning, and then people would go off to work to do whatever they would normally do on Sunday. But it was, or is, seems to be the best day to celebrate the Eucharist, because every Sunday is a little Easter. All right. Get my notes here. Shepherd notes that the exact motive for transferring from Saturday to Sunday as part of religious observance for Christians is not clear. He mentions some things in his book if you want to go over those. But eventually, Sunday was celebrated as the Lord's Day. And of course, well, I already said that about the little Easter. Anticipating myself. Christians further decided to separate themselves from the Jews, or at least Jewish practices. The Jews fasted on Mondays and Thursdays, so by the first half of the 2nd century, Christians fasted on Wednesdays and Fridays. Friday, of course, is also a natural time for fasting since you're commemorating the crucifixion. Other times of fasting developed in the early church were Lent. The fast sometimes lasted a day and some lasted longer than a day to several weeks. Eventually, the number came to be settled at 40, excluding the Sundays, which is why Ash Wednesday is on a Wednesday. However, the length of the fast before Easter depends upon different religious groups, and people do it differently. Also, the Ember Days came to be associated with ordination, and those were days of fast, the Monday, Thursday, and Fridays. Monday, Fridays, and Saturdays of a week. Okay, other than Easter and Pentecost, the only other festivals in the early church were the annual commemoration of the deaths of the martyrs. The oldest example of this is St. Polycarp, Bishop of Smyrna, who was martyred in AD 156. After that became the beginnings of the historical commemorations of Jesus, St. Mary, and the Apostles. And this was then, in the 4th century then, Epiphany and Christmas were added to this list. Shepherd notes that adding Christmas and Epiphany are more for theological reasons rather than historical reasons. So Epiphany and the Incarnation celebrate, Christmas that is, celebrate the mystery of the Incarnation as compared to historical events. So it's the theological more than the historical. Then another force that led to the development of the calendar was people being able to visit Jerusalem. And this is where the different Holy Week, the Purification, and the Ascension began. And then finally came the Feast of the Apostles. I'm just going to briefly mention this. Shepherd mentions this several places in his, when referring to Christmas as being, Christmas being December 25th to rival the Feast of the Sun God, S-U-N God, the pagan celebration. And that certainly might be true, although I always wondered, why isn't it if the sun god was worshipped on the shortest day of the year, then why isn't Christmas on the shortest day of the year? Why is it 2 or 3 days later? But anyway, that's one theory, and it may be the best, I don't know. Because a lot of things the church took, and the term is used, it's used is baptized to be able to use it in a Christian way. But anyway, the other thought is that it was thought that famous people died on the same day that they were born, or on the same day on which they were conceived. It was believed that Jesus died on what is now March 25th. Therefore, it was felt that March 25th was the day that Jesus was conceived, the day he died being the day he was conceived, and 9 months later, of course, is December 25th. I like that interpretation better myself. Shepard uses the term modern scholars. I think that should always be used with a slight grain of salt. Just because somebody is modern doesn't mean they're correct. But anyway, going on from that. Now, feasts mushroomed during the Middle Ages, and there was hardly a day without a special observance. Cranmer reformed the calendar, and so, in fact, there were no black letter days at all in the 1549 calendar. There were only found a typo. And no black, okay, and no black, okay. Oh. It was a typo. Well, actually, oh well, worse than I thought typo. All right. The 1549 prayer book had no black days. The 1552 only had 4 black letter days. St. George, which makes sense, St. Lawrence, St. Clement, and August the 1st, which is known as Lammas Day and the Feast of St. Peter in Chains. Later prayer book revisions have taken a somewhat extended the use of proper prefaces and octaves. Let me just step back a little bit. The principles underlying the prayer book calendar and the revisions of the prayer book calendar are one, that the uniformity of all observances. Only 5 feasts. This again is in the 1552. The 1552 book. The principles underlying the prayer book calendar were the uniformity of all observances. Only 5 feasts were distinguished by a proper preface, and 4 of these were restored as octaves in 1552. Later prayer book revisions have somewhat extended the use of proper prefaces and octaves. Second, the limitation of liturgical observances to feasts and saints that have a basis in Scripture. So in other words, the standard for inclusion or rejection in the calendar was not antiquity of cultus, or how long the saint had been remembered, or his general popularity, but rather the historical mention in the Bible. Even so, not all biblical commemorations were retained. For example, the visitation and the transfiguration, while they're biblical, weren't retained in the earliest prayer books, earliest revisions of the prayer books. All Saints' Day is, in fact, a prayer book holy day. Hold on. I'm going to try something. Okay, well, I found out I can pause, which is good. All right. So anyway, in the 1549, 1552, they didn't have the visitation or the transfiguration, even those are biblical. But it did include All Saints' Day, and the idea was under a single observance was lumped all the wealth of Christian sanctity since New Testament times. So All Saints' Day is for all of the saints to be commemorated. All right. And then I mentioned, because we had pointed out, the American Prayer Book of 1928 had the special propers for a Saints' Day and also for the Feast of the Dedication of a church. The Feast of the Dedication of a church can be used, for example, if your church is named after a saint, St. George's, St. Francis, St. Peter's, that kind of thing. You could use those propers instead of St. Peter. Isn't really a good example because that's a prayer book holy day. But St. Francis or St. George, instead of using the missals or the saints for a Saints' Day, you could use the Feast of the Dedication propers for those particular saints, mentioning the saints there. All right. I believe. Oh, I just want to say a note about liturgical color. Liturgical colors are not prayer book. You're not going to find in the prayer book that you wear green in Trinity season, or violet in Advent and Lent, and white at Easter and Eastertide and Trinity Sunday. None of that is in the prayer book. And I think for about the first 1,000 years, there were no liturgical colors. And so white is always appropriate, is what it boils down to. There's two schemes. One's the Sarum scheme, and the other's the Roman scheme. Most of us use the Roman scheme of liturgical colors, and I'd have to look up to see what the Sarum scheme is. I know there's one scheme of using liturgical colors that I kind of liked. You only use two colors, red and white. Use white on any day that you would currently use white in the Roman, with the Roman scheme. Every other day you would use red, and our red set here is particularly beautiful, and I would certainly wear red all the time if I could, but I'd probably get tired of it too, because I really do like the church calendar and the change of colors and different, and emphases and all that kind of stuff. I think it really brings out the fullness of the church year and the Christian faith. All right. Now, the next thing we're going to do is the tables and rules for the movable and immovable feasts and fasts. Again, if you go to look at your prayer book, getting to know your prayer book, you'll see page 4, section 8, tables and rules for the movable and immovable feasts, together with the days of fasting and abstinence throughout the year and the days of solemn supplication. Now, some of the days within the Christian year are movable, and some of them are immovable. And the fixed days always fall on certain dates, while the others are movable, which basically they move based on how Easter moves. The movable portion of the Christian year is dependent upon the date of Easter. I just said that. All right. Now the calendar, and if you go back to those pages where the calendar were listed, that only lists the fixed holy days. It doesn't list any of the holy days that depend upon Easter. Sundays, and then Sundays do depend upon the date of Easter. Excuse me, I ate lunch just before I started this. Sundays depend upon the date of Easter, and all the things, Holy Week and Easter week and all of that, again, depend upon the date of Easter. So those are the movable feasts The immovable ones are the ones that are listed there in the calendar. Now, because there's essentially two calendars, the movable and the immovable, two holy days could fall on the same date. And adjustments have to be made to avoid conflicts and to make sure that every holy day may have its proper observance. And now, the way this is done is there are rules governing precedence of one day over another. And the rules are based upon two principles: the relative importance of the day and the relative antiquity of the liturgical observance of the day. So, in general, the days relate to the persons of the Blessed Trinity or our Lord, His incarnation and redemption, including the Sundays preparatory to Christmas and Easter, have priority over days devoted to His disciples. When it comes to the disciples, the relative antiquity of the liturgical observance of the day with fixed propers. So, for a long time, and Shepherd points this out, the Sundays after Christmas, Epiphany, Easter, and Whitsunday were vacant. They had no specific propers. And thus, many saints' days are actually older than the commemoration of Sundays after Trinity, for example. So, so that is how, that's how the table of precedence is set up. Now, the table of precedence for the 1928 prayer book and the table of precedence for the 1979 prayer book are different, especially with the three feasts that occur after Christmas. But anyway, let's go to page Roman numeral 50, tables and rules for the movable and immovable. Got my pages mixed up here. You'll see at the beginning tables and rules for the movable and immovable feasts, together with the days of fasting and abstinence throughout the whole year. Rules to know when the movable feasts and holy days begin. So it lists there, Advent Sunday is always the Sunday nearest to the Feast of St. Andrew, whether before or after. And then it goes on when the different Sundays are. Then we have a table of feasts to be observed in this church throughout the year, all Sundays, and then it goes through the circumcision, the Epiphany, and the fixed feasts. And then also it mentions Monday and Tuesday in Easter week and Monday and Tuesday in Whitsun week. Those are feast days in the church. Now, let's go to the table of precedence, which is on the next page, and which you've been using for your quizzes. A table of precedence, or tables of precedence. The holy days following have precedence over any other Sunday or holy day. So the Sundays in Advent, Christmas, the Epiphany, the Septuagesima, the pre-Lent season, Ash Wednesday, the Sundays in Lent, all the days of Holy Week, Easter Day and the following 7 days. So Easter 1, it has precedence over any other holy day. Rogation Sunday, the Ascension Day, and the Sunday after the Ascension, Whitsun Day and its 6 following days, and then Trinity Sunday. So those are the, I'll use the term first level or first tier that always take precedence. And then below that, well, and then it says, if any other holy day fall on any day noted in the preceding table, the observance of such holy day shall be transferred to the first convenient open day. And the classic example of this is the Annunciation. The Annunciation almost always occurs in Lent, and in this year it actually occurred on Good Friday. And so if when the Annunciation occurs in Lent or in Holy Week, it has to be transferred. If it occurs on a Sunday in Lent, including Passion Sunday, it's moved to the following Monday. And actually, that would include the pre-Lenten Sundays also, although I'd have to look at a table to see if March 25th, I don't think March 25th can be in pre-Lent season. I'm not sure about that. You're going to be getting a table of precedence where it lists the holy day and then tells you how to move it, but I'm not sending that to you now because I want to ask a few more questions about precedence. But you will get that, and at that point you're not going to have to. If you should know it, and if you don't, well, you can look at the table and you should be okay. So, first Monday after the Sunday. However, if it occurs during Holy Week, then it has to be moved to the Monday after Easter 1. And that's what happened this year, is that the Ascension was on Good Friday. The prayer book moves that feast to the Monday after Easter 1. And we'll talk about what the missals do in a little bit. Okay. Then you have what we'll talk about as the second tier, if I can use that term. The following holy days have precedence of days not noted in the foregoing table. St. Stephen, John, Holy Innocents, the list is there. On these holy days, the collect, epistle, and gospel of the feast shall be used. Remember, shall, you have to use it. It's not may, it's shall be used. But on the Sundays, the collect for the feast shall be followed by the collect for the Sundays. And I ask you this question with St. Michael and all angels: what do you do what did you do this year since it fell on a Thursday? What would you have done had it fallen on a Sunday? Okay. The Ordo calendar, however, and let's talk about the Ordo calendar a little bit here. The Ordo calendar has more feast days than the prayer book does. And I'm looking at the October 2016. And so we have on the 4th, St. Francis. On the 6th, St. Bruno. Did I do this before? I hate it when I do this. I did do this because... So we have those prayer book, those Ordo calendar holy days. Because of the way of having black letter days and red letter days, it makes it more complicated to determine which day should be celebrated and which day should be commemorated and which day should be just ignored completely. I am going to be sending you a handout. Does this show up? No, this stuff always shows up as white. Ooh, wait a minute. Well, just realized the image I'm looking at on the screen here is a mirror image. Huh. Well, of course it is. Well, anyway. It's called Table of Occurrence. And I'm just going to, on the side here, you have what kind of a feast is it? Is it a double feast of the first class, a double feast of the second class, a common octave day, a greater double feast, a semi-double, a day in a common octave, a vigil, a simple feast, or a memorial? And then on the other side, you have, is it a first class Sunday, a second class Sunday, a Sunday throughout the year, a double feast of the first class or second class, an octave day, a greater double feast, a semi-double feast, Ferias and Lent or Advent, and just the list goes on and on. So that's, if you were to use the calendar, or if you were to develop this calendar, you need to use this particular table of occurrence to figure out when two holy days fall on the same date, which one do you use? Now, it's actually even more complicated than that, because this table only tells you which holy days has precedent over the other holy day. There are two evensongs, which all of these feasts, if you have the right book that tells you what the evensongs are. There's the first evensong and the second evensong. Now, if you turn to the tables of holy days in the prayer book, let me see. Psalms and lessons for the fixed holy days on Roman numeral 44 and 45. If you look at the top there, you see St. Andrew. And off to the left, the right, you have Psalms 102, 15, and 117. Then you have Isaiah 49, 1 through 6, and 1 Corinthians 4, 1 through 16. So that's the eve, which would be November 29th. Then you have, below that have November 30th, and then again at evening prayer you have Psalm 96 and 100, and Zechariah 8:20, and John 12:20 through 36. The evensong for the eve is the first evensong, and the evensong for the day is the second evensong. So if you have two holy days that are next to each other, and you're doing the lessons for morning and evening prayer, you have to determine which takes precedence. The first evensong of the feast of the following day's feast, or the second evensong of the feast that's that particular day. And I happen to look through this calendar here, and let's take a look at October 17th and 18th. Now, St. Ethelreda is what's called a simple feast. St. Luke is a greater double feast. The first evensong of a greater double takes precedence over the second evensong of a simple feast. So on the 17th, if you can find lessons for St. Ethelreda, you would read those for morning prayer, but evening prayer is the eve of St. Luke. You read those lessons. Now let's go down to the next two Monday and Tuesday. St. Raphael on the 24th, and St. Crispin and Crispian martyrs on the 25th. In this case, Raphael is a greater double, and Crispian is a simple feast. So what this means is that the second evensong of St. Raphael takes precedence over the first evensong of St. Crispin and Crispian. There are actually tables for this to help you determine which feast you use if you know what kind of a feast it is. To know what kind of a feast it is, you pretty much need a missal. The prayer book doesn't use terms like doubles and semi-doubles and greater feasts and things like that. These terms you can find in Shepherd's book. And feast of the first class and feast of the second class. All the precedent is taken from that tables of precedence. And from there you can figure out anything that you really need to be doing if you're following the prayer book. And if you try to do the table, use the table of occurrence and the morning, the daily office, first evensong and second evensong, and there are books that list those propers and those lessons for those days. It gets really confusing, and you'll appreciate the prayer book that much more. And kudos to Bishop Upham, who puts together this calendar, because it can really give you a headache to try to figure out what day has precedence and what should be, what should be celebrated, what should be commemorated, and what should just be ignored, celebrated, commemorated, transferred to another day, or just simply dropped for that particular year. I don't have my missal there, but I'm pretty sure that St. Luke is more than a greater double, but I don't know. If I find out, I'll let you know. So, all we need to determine what feast to be celebrated and what the precedence is to use the prayer book. And then Shepherd writes, all we need, however, for our more simple prayer book calendar are these brief tables of precedence. The rule is this. In case of conflict, the day of lesser significance is moved to the first open day. The next, which is open day, meaning the next day that has no appointed collect, epistle, and gospel. That's what open day means. So, for example, the Annunciation falls in Holy Week, it is transferred to the Monday after the first Sunday in Easter. If it falls on a Sunday in Lent, it is moved to the following Monday. He also mentions there can be a double shift, and I'll give you an example. His example is Easter following on April 25th. If you follow the Ordo calendar, the way feasts are shifted or transferred is different than what the prayer book does. So, for example, Maundy Thursday was March 24th, which is the feast of St. Gabriel. The Annunciation is March 25th, Good Friday. The prayer book shifts the Annunciation to the Monday after Easter 1, because that's the first free day. However, the missals transfer St. Gabriel to the Monday after, because St. Gabriel has propers. Excuse me again. And the Annunciation is then transferred to Tuesday. So if you're transferring two or more holy days that are together, you end up transferring them as a group. And so the way they transfer will be different than what the prayer book would say. Again, St. Gabriel is not a prayer book saint. The Annunciation is. So again, it's much simpler to know what the prayer book does than what the missals do. And let me just say this, and again, I may have said this once before. When I was in seminary, we celebrated Mass every day or every weekday. So we did celebrate all these minor saints and in addition to the major saints, the prayer book saints. So if it had said, like this year, I think we would have done St. Gabriel on Monday after Easter 1 and the Annunciation on Tuesday, even though the prayer book would have it differently. And I know one priest told me he likes to celebrate, and rather doing the Feria, just repeating the Sunday propers, he likes to do the prayer book, the calendar, black letter saints, the minor saints. Okay. And as I said, I'm going to give you a handout on conflicts, but you're not going to get that until later. Maybe after the next quiz, which I plan on sending out, if not tonight when I post this, at least maybe tomorrow or the next day. All right. Let's go up just a bit then, above the tables of precedence, the tables of fasts. The terms fast and abstinence are kind of used fast and loose in antiquity. Today, if you look at something like St. Augustine's prayer book, fast means not eating food, period. Abstinence means not eating a specific kind of food. So the days of fast in the Book of Common Prayer where you're not supposed to eat is Ash Wednesday and Good Friday. And as you probably know, this doesn't mean don't eat at all from the night of Shrove Tuesday to the morning of the Thursday after Ash Wednesday. It just means limiting the amount of food that you eat on Ash Wednesday or on Good Friday. Again, St. Augustine's prayer book gives you all these rules. Children, I think, below the age of 12 don't fast. Adults over the age of 65 don't fast. Darn. I don't have to fast anymore. I still do, but I don't have to. If pregnant women don't have to fast, if you're a construction worker, you're doing heavy labor during the day, you don't have to fast. There's an awful lot of rules on how to fast and abstinence. So anyway, the fast days are Ash Wednesday and Good Friday. Then it says, other days of fasting on which the church requires such a measure of abstinence as is more especially suited to extraordinary acts and exercises of devotion. This is really not defined what that means, but generally the historical way of doing it is abstinence means refraining from meat on Fridays. And the purpose of this is to remind us of Jesus' crucifixion. As Sunday is the weekly commemoration of the resurrection, Friday is the weekly commemoration of the crucifixion. And we don't have fast or abstinence during Christmas to Epiphany because those are the celebration of the Incarnation. But anyway, so abstinence, that's the normal way of doing it. Clearly, there's other ways of abstaining besides not eating meat on those days. For some people, for example, someone who doesn't eat meat to begin with, giving up meat is nothing. I mean, it has no meaning at all. So you have to find something else to do on the days of fast and abstinence. So the 40 days of Lent, the Ember Days at the Four Seasons, being the Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday after the first Sunday in Lent, the Feast of Pentecost, September 14th and December 13th. I believe the Advent Ember Days are always in the week. Well, it can't be as late as St. Thomas because that's the 21st. Okay, the Ember Days, the Advent Ember Days are all the Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday after the third Sunday. I know it says the 13th here, which is St. Lucy, but it's really the third Sunday in Advent, and those days are marked for the daily office in the lectionary for the lessons. It's only the September ones that change based upon when September 14th falls. All right, and then all Fridays are days of extraordinary measures, except for Christmas and Epiphany and the days in between. And now there's called days of solemn supplication, which are the Rogation days, being Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday before Holy Thursday, or the Ascension of our Lord. You should note that the Rogation days are not days of fasting because they're in Eastertide. Also, the weekdays in Advent are not fast days, except, of course, for the Fridays. And I'm sure you know, in computing the fast days for Lent, the Sundays in Lent are not included because every Sunday's a feast day. All right. I didn't know how long this was going to take, and it's going to take us just about where I want to go. One of my problems, I'll do some lamentation here, is that what I'm giving you now is our class 4, but my notes tell me that it's class 3 because in 2014 it was class 3, and it gets me really confused. So anyway, It doesn't have any effect on you, but it really makes my day complicated. So I'm happy that I'm ending with class 3 because then in my master list it'll say class 4, notes from class 3, and then on class 5 I can start the notes for class 4. So anyway, hope I haven't confused you too much. The Ember days are days of fast and abstinence. And so if you look at, for example, the December, the 2nd and 9th Fridays are abstinence, as is the 23rd. The 16th is fast and abstinence because it's an Ember day, and the 30th is not a day of fast or abstinence because it's in Christmastide. All right. Table of precedence. Now, so I think, going back to the table of precedence, you'll find that it's fairly easy to determine which holy days need to be celebrated when. And if you need to know the rubrics that go along with the propers, and there's not a lot of those rubrics, and we'll go over them as we go farther along in here. If you know the different rubrics and when these feasts occur, you can determine where they're going to fall. So what this, let me just also just for your so you'll know, in the 1979 Book of Common Prayer, the Sunday after Christmas is always Christmas 1. So the 3 holy days after Christmas are always transferred. 1, 2, or 3 of them are transferred, and they're transferred in order. So if Christmas falls on a Saturday, the Sunday is Christmas 1, and then Holy Innocents is on the 27th, and then 28th and 29th. They're all shifted one day. If Christmas falls on a Friday, the next day, the Saturday, is the Feast of St. Stephen, and then the Sunday is Christmas 1, and then only St. John and Holy Innocents are transferred. The other thing is that in the book of the 79 prayer book, I think I'm correct on this, all Sundays, Spoonerism, all Sundays of Trinity have precedence over holy days of the saints. So in the Episcopal Church, you're never going to find St. Luke celebrated on a Sunday, or St. Michael and all angels, or St. Simon and St. Jude, because they're feasts of apostles, and they don't have precedence over the Sundays after Trinity. One of the first priests that taught me the things I needed to learn to be a priest said, or a deacon at that point, was it's really a good thing that every so often we get to preach about St. Luke, Matthew, and the different saints, because they're learned from. This is weird. The screen
is freezing, but the time's still going on, and then I speed up and slow down as I talk. Oh well. All right. The last thing I want to talk to the next is a table for finding holy days. And I'm not going to go through this. It's really confusing, and of course, all of this is done by computers. You can find out somewhere when Easter's going to be in the year 31. Known, it's not. It can't be found out. So you don't really need these
churches in Asia Minor found themselves in schism with the Church of Rome, followed by most of the rest of Christendom. Over the question of the follow Jewish custom, which said, which they said was the tradition given them by St. John in celebrating Easter on the day of the spring full moon, regardless of what day of the week it was. So the churches in Asia Minor would celebrate Easter on any day of the week. It could be Sunday or Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, any day of the week. They were known as, if I'm pronouncing this correct, Quarto Decemans, from their observance of the feast on the 14th day of the month of Nisan, the day when the Paschal Lamb was slaughtered. Rome and all the other churches always transferred their celebration to the Sunday following the spring full moon. So here is an early schism between the Eastern Church and the Western Church over the date of Easter. The question was finally settled in favor of the Roman custom at the First Ecumenical Council at Nicaea in 325. So you can see we've been celebrating Easter on Sunday for a long time, but it hasn't always been that way. And if you go on in you get me at my worst. If you go on in Shepherd's paragraph, he explains if the full moon is on Saturday, March 21st, what would happen? If it's on Sunday, March 21st, what would happen? If it's on the on Saturday, March 21st, on Sunday, March 21st, when it's moved and when it's not. So anyway, I just mentioned that for, I just think it's interesting that some people wanted to celebrate Easter on the 14th day of Nisan, and no matter what day of the week it was, rather than on the Sunday. All right, let me just get out. I think that's all I have. Yeah, there's the tables for finding holy days, the table to find Easter Day. And all these Sunday letters and the Dominical names and stuff like that. This particular prayer book I have ends on 2013. Said, well, is the world going to end since the prayer book ends Easter's on 2013? Of course it didn't. And if you find newer printed prayer books, I just got a couple from the Anglican Parishes Association, which has the 28 prayer book printed, but it doesn't have the certification. It doesn't have the Episcopal Church. It doesn't say it's from the Episcopal Church. It's printed by the Anglican Parishes Association, which is a printing arm of the Anglican Catholic Church. Anyway, they go beyond 2013. And the tables for finding holy days and all that stuff. I don't understand it, and I'm not going to try to learn about it. I don't think it's important to know. All right. If you want more information about any of this, read Shepherd commentary on the tables and all that other stuff. Next time, we finally are going to get into the use of the Book of Common Prayer, although I am going to start with the history of morning and evening prayer. There'll be some handouts for you for that. I may send out some other handouts. Oh, yeah, I'll definitely send out that handout that has the table of occurrence, just so you can see how you would have to try to figure when two feasts occurred if they fall on the same day, based upon the relative importance of them. So I think that is it. I've discovered I can pause, and now I'm going to quit. So Have a good week, and I'll get back to you next week, hopefully, with class number 6.